I am curious to understand who Scott needed to become this person that can be so confidently jump into businesses and help them be more successful and help them grow. So let's back way up to your journey of how you became who you are today.
Yeah.
And so let's start with, tell me a little bit about young Scott growing up.
Well, and thinking back on it, one of the things I remember, my kids came back from school one day and they said, Dad, we're privileged. And I said, well, what's privilege? And they said, well, if you have to ask, that means you are. And I laughed about that because that was kind of a word that was new to me. I grew up in a pretty a good family. I mean, I credit my mom and dad, married for over 50 years. The things I can remember as a kid that kind of formed me in it, when I thought about that question, I thought about the idea that every holiday we went to Grandma and Grandpa's house somewhere. Like I never spent Christmas or Thanksgiving at home. And it reminded me of I just thought it was normal to hang with family, to not go do your own thing, but to do things with the generation, that skip generation. And I didn't realize how formative that was for me, other than the fact that when I got older, I like to be around family. I mean, I like to have memories with people close to me. And that was, the importance of family was huge. The other thing that was a huge thing for me when I was a kid, and this came more in my teens, is I went through young life. And it was weird to make a choice from a faith perspective on your own. And that was when religion became less about the institution and more about what you believed. Mm. I thought those were kind of two things that have helped guide me a little bit to this point where I am in my life.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that and sharing that example of how every holiday you got the chance to spend that with family. Now, was that local in Michigan? Where were you born and raised?
Born in Midland.
Okay.
Grandpa was in a place called Hibbing, Minnesota, up in the Iron Range.
Okay.
A 2-day drive back in the day. And then my grandma was in Ann Arbor.
Okay.
And so between those two places, those were my home away from home on holidays. And one way or another, we were going one way. I mean, we never, ever stayed home for holidays. We were always on the road, and it was cool.
Now, tell me a little bit about what your parents did growing up. Were they working, more of the 9-to-5? Were they kind of the entrepreneur type style? Can you tell me a little bit about what they did?
Not entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Dad worked at a place called Dow Chemical.
Okay. Yep.
And it was really interesting about his job because he had an MBA from Stanford. And so a lot of, his pedigree from an education would expect you're going to go to the top. And I think Dad around work, I never sensed him saying work is everything. Work was a means, and he didn't dislike his job. He never complained about it, but he never, he made a decision. I can remember this when I was a kid. He made a decision because at the time Dow used to move people all over the world, and he made a decision not to go to Asia and uproot us. He made a decision to stay in Midland. And so what I remember about my dad's job was less about what he did, but how he approached it. And my mom was a teacher. She taught, and then she stayed home with us up and through about when I was 12. And then she went back part-time. So through high school, she was working half days. Mm. And I remember one time asking her about work, and she goes, I love my job, but I also love being a mom. And so, I've never met a more dedicated teacher than my mom. She was all in on whatever she did, but yet she also recognized that all in sometimes doesn't always have to be work. And so those two things that's what my parents did, and that's kind of what they taught me from their work.
Yeah, really laying an early foundation of the importance of family, right? Not just with what they said, but then with the actions. You always kind of think about, like, people say, like, show me, or I can tell what you value by looking at your bank account and your calendar, right? Just a couple of those things. And you just mentioning, not just what your parents were saying, your mom saying this is important of being a mom, I like my job, but I love being a mom, but also they backed it up with their calendar by making intentions to take the 2-day drive and go spend time with, the grandparents and make sure that value is instilled young on. What are some other maybe potential foundational things that you can think back of and you're like, man, that's something that's really impacted my future from a childhood state?
Yeah, and I think the one of the things my parents always stressed was learning. I joke about it, but as a kid, I never went to a zoo. Like I always we'll take my kids we took them, to an amusement park or a zoo or someplace fun. I said, when I went to Chicago, I did 4 days in museums, guys. 4 days in museums. And frankly, I was cranky by about day 3 and they dragged me through the last one. But that sense of learning and the idea of I want to learn, I think that's been just foundational for me. Because even as, you mentioned decades, the decades go by kind of fast, but you always look forward to the next decade if you look forward to something like, what am I going to learn in the next decade? And that's always been something that's just kind of been foundational for me. It's introduced me to new ideas. It's allowed my career, my career pivots to go a little smoother. When I've changed jobs, it makes it easier because you jump into a new role, not afraid of what you're going to get, but the idea that I get to learn. When I walk into a room with a new client, I have the greatest clients in the world, and the industries I get to understand, it's just like, it's a museum with people and business, I love that. And that was foundational for me.
Yeah. And that, Jen, that curiosity and wanting to learn makes almost, sometimes I've seen it, you make a game out of it, right? It's kind of like, okay, what am I going to learn today? I've got to learn something new every single day, and it turns into a little bit of a game. So you grew up in the area. You told me a little bit about your family. Did you have an older brother, sister, siblings, anything like that?
Yeah, I have an older brother. 2 years older than me.
Okay.
I followed him my whole life. I went to the same school he went to. I joined the same fraternity. I love my brother. I have a lot of respect for him, and we've had a great friendship.
And what school is that?
Michigan Tech University.
Michigan Tech.
I'm a Husky.
Yeah. What'd you go to Michigan Tech for?
Well, that's the funny story. I went there to be an engineer. And the only reason I chose it was metallurgical engineer because they gave me a scholarship.
Okay.
I'm like, you give me money, I'll study anything if you're going to give me money. And at that time, it was a third of my salary and room and board, which was pretty big.
Yeah.
At the time. And I remember going up there. And the funny thing is about 2.5 years in, my grades started great, like Dean's List first semester. I'm like, I got this. Little by little, I got into the heavy engineering class. By the 2.5 years in, I was just like, I was on probation. I was failing all my classes, hated my classes. And I decided, but I love Michigan Tech. I love the friends I'd made. I love the North. I love being outside. I love fishing, hunting. And there was a moment in time when I was probably going to get, if I didn't do something different, I was going to get kicked out. And I remember calling home and I asked my parents, I said, hey, Mom, Dad, I'm not doing well. And they knew that. We spent about a year trying to figure out what's next for me. Like, what's the ideal career for me? Because I was struggling with that. And they said, I said, I'd like to come home and then I'll come back in the next semester in like 4 weeks. And they said, no, Scott, you're not coming home. Figure it out. I'm like, what? I can't come home? So it's like, grow up. But yeah, that's why I went. Michigan Tech and I still love it up there. My wife is from the UP, and my kids all know when I cross the Mackinac Bridge, it's like, it takes a deep breath, and that's his happy place.